indigeneity, DNA itself doesn't really mean anything to us, and I'm going to explain why. Remember at the very start when I said that being indigenous is site specific? Okay, so when you talk indigeneity as being site specific, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be intermingling of DNA. It doesn't mean, especially when you have people that have lived side by side for centuries. Now, you also have to understand that even according to the Arabs' own history, when they conquered Medina, Medina was a Jewish city. Medina was filled with Jews. And even according to the Islam's own definitions, what they did was they took over that city, killed all the men, and forced the women to marry. Now, where does DNA come from? Right? Sure. So if you marry a whole bunch of women that are Jews and you marry them into your people and you force them to have children, your first generation is obviously going to carry Jewish DNA. Now, it's no different than in North America. The Blackfoot and Cree, which are the two native tribes in Alberta where I am, they fought constantly. But if you do a DNA test, you find very quickly that there are a lot of Cree people that carry Blackfoot DNA and vice versa. That doesn't mean that a Cree person is suddenly Blackfoot because they carry some Blackfoot DNA. And it doesn't mean that a Blackfoot would be Cree just because they carry some Cree DNA. Now, where this whole discourse kind of gets off the rails is when people say, well, all of the Palestinians carry Jewish DNA. Well, they've lived in Israel now for over 1,000 years. Of course, there's going to be intermingling. Of course, there's going to be, and there were actually people, and I know some of them who live in the PA who admit that they are probably converted Jews. They still, some of them even light candles. They couldn't tell you why they light the candles. They say it's a tradition. Now, that doesn't make them Jewish. Now, what it does, if they suddenly decide one day, hey, you know what? I want to explore that part of my person. I want to explore that piece of my identity. I want to understand more about Jews. More power to them. But it doesn't make someone Jewish just because they carry some Jewish DNA. And it's super important to understand that, because once you adopt the conqueror's mantle, like once you put on that cloak and say, I am a member of the dominant society that has colonized you, it doesn't matter if you carry indigenous DNA. Then it ceases to actually matter to indigenous people, because you have now decided. It would be like me. Look at me. I have pretty pale skin. My mother is Norwegian. They're the whitest people on the planet. Okay? My dad's Métis. But if I was to shave my beard, cut my hair, leave my glasses on so I look a little bit more like a white guy, and tell everybody, my name's Ryan Bellerose. Bellerose is actually technically a French patronymic name. I'm actually just French and Norwegian. Then other Métis people would actually stop seeing me as Métis. They would say, okay, well, you know what? If you're going to tell everybody you're French and Norwegian and benefit from the fact that you have pale skin, we don't see you as part of the Métis community anymore. So when we're talking about indigenous status, we have to be super careful with this stuff. Look, I'm not saying that there aren't Palestinians who carry Jewish DNA. I'm not saying that there aren't Palestinians who do have ancestral ties. They do have an ancestral connection. They've lived there for 1,000 years. Of course, they're going to have an ancestral connection. What they don't have is a distinct culture. What they don't have are any signifiers or any cultural constructs that are purely Palestinian. If you take a look and you ask them specifically, give me 3 cultural constructs that are strictly Palestinian, they are not Arabic in any sort of way, you never get a straight answer. The only answer I ever got, and it's kind of a funny answer, but it's kind of ridiculous, I asked for 3 cultural constructs, and a pro-Palestinian told me, oh, well, sperm smuggling. Palestinian sperm smuggling is a cultural construct. Because apparently, yeah, exactly. Apparently, when a man gets put in jail for throwing rocks at Israelis.
Ryan, I just want to propose a slightly different way of looking at the DNA thing. I personally don't think it's really important either. I think it might be the least important aspect of this argument, but I'm not sure it's right to look at it as Arabs came here and then intermingled with some Jews. I think a better way to look at it is that when most Jews were exiled, some remained on the land. When Arabs colonized this land, eventually the Jews living here were Arabized and then intermixed. But it's not that, right? So it's populations that have been living here continuously for thousands of years. So that's just
Okay,
on
but now
point.
you,
And
I
me,
understand where you're
and
coming from.
me as an Ashkenazi Jew, right? Ashkenazi Jew, they discover is only 50% of Ashkenazi DNA comes from this region, and the other 50% is somewhere in Europe. That's what DNA tests.
Something like that, right?
45%. Well, something
the
along those.
majority
But
from the
Again,
Middle East. But
that's why when we're having discussions about indigeneity, we talk about blood quantum, right? Because blood quantum is actually something that white people came up with in order to determine who an Indian actually was. The problem with blood quantum, and I've said this many times in my writing as well, the problem with blood quantum is that one of the ways that you get rid of indigenous people is to breed them out. And the French version, the French, the way that they colonized other places was actually to breed out the natives. Like if you look at French Algeria, that was that was an actual French way to colonize, was to basically show up somewhere and breed the natives out. Now, that's why what I'm saying, that in the DNA as it's by itself does not designate someone who's indigenous.